which hot seat coaches shit and which ones get off the pot. I've got 4 guys here that I want to discuss with you. The first being Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley was one of those guys when I first really started getting into college football. I was like, oh my God, he's just at another level. He is years above what these other offensive coordinators in the sport are doing. Has that ended? Has everybody caught up to Lincoln Riley? You know, he needs to have a big year for the Trojans this season. And not just because his teams have gotten worse every season since joining USC. And by the way, if you go back to Oklahoma, each season they got worse as well too. It's not just important to reverse that trend and to actually improve after a season. There were some talented players on this USC roster that left for one reason or another and have awesome opportunities lined up for them this season. Miller Moss, last year starting quarterback for most of the season. Now they're with Jordan Maeva. Probably said that last name wrong. I apologize to him. He was benched toward the end of the season, Miller Moss was, and is now the starting quarterback for Louisville. One thing I know about Louisville football is that Jeff Brom gets shit done with quarterbacks. And I think Miller Moss is a really talented thrower of the football. So if Miller Moss goes to Louisville, and Louisville is one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the ACC, yeah, I know it's not the Big Ten, but if USC is getting struggles out of its quarterback play, and this dude's over in the ACC lighting it up, that's a bad look on Lincoln Riley. Your players should be better when they're with you. Another guy, the Branch brothers in general, but Zachariah I want to talk about specifically. Super talented wide receiver, left USC, now is in Georgia, might be the best receiver on the Bulldogs this season. If Georgia all of a sudden resurrects this passing game they didn't have last year, and he's one of the better receivers in the SEC, and your receivers aren't doing too much, that's a bad look. You can't have guys leave you when you're this offensive guru and have them perform better without you as their coach. This year needs to see a leap from USC. There's no Ohio State or Penn State on the schedule. You do host Michigan, thankfully, but you also have to travel to face Oregon and Notre Dame, 2 incredibly tough road games, and what I would say 2 teams that are certainly better than USC. Michigan could be a toss-up depending what they get from their quarterback position. They've got 3 make-or-break games on this schedule: Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska. If Lincoln Riley is struggling to beat the second or even maybe third tier teams of the Big Ten, all hope is lost for me with Lincoln and USC. And it speaks to the league catching up to him, to players doing better outside of his scheme. And that's where I think you can start to get that really hot seat that either, you know, he's beating those teams and can steal a win against Michigan or Oregon and Notre Dame, and you're like, okay, Lincoln Riley's back. Or he loses to Oregon and Notre Dame, maybe loses to Michigan, and loses to one of Illinois, Iowa, or Nebraska. That's when things start to get a little bit tricky for me with the relationship between Riley and USC. Hugh Freeze is a funny character in the world of college sports. He makes me chuckle sometimes. Is he a slightly troubled man? Possibly. But it kind of like Lincoln Riley, it was this other offensive guru that really has yet to hit his stride at his current big-time destination. 2 losing seasons with the Tigers, 5-11 record in the SEC, really bad fourth quarter collapses, second half collapses in conference as well too. They're hot and cold and colder, and then maybe a little bit hot and cold. It just hasn't been going the way Auburn probably intended it to. Now, for a while, he was hanging on to the fact that he was doing great in recruiting and great in the transfer portal to kind of elevate the reason why you would keep a Hugh Freeze on. Oh, let those guys get in, let things change, things will get better. Well, that's dipped now after some of his top 2026 recruits have backed out of their commitments. Now, keep in mind, with Auburn and Hugh Freeze, Auburn has never had a head coach survive 3 consecutive losing seasons. And the way that Auburn's schedule has lined up this year really doesn't make me feel good for Hugh Freeze. So SEC play starts off with Oklahoma and A&M on the road, followed by hosting Georgia and Mizzou. That's your first month. It does lighten up at the end, but it's really tough sledding for Freeze if he starts SEC play 1-3. Maybe he gets that win over Oklahoma, but there's a chance he goes 0-4 if Oklahoma's legit. I think really highly of Mizzou. A&M and Georgia are definitely better than Auburn right now. So if Freeze starts 1-3 or 0-4 in conference play, you still have Vandy to play, and Diego Pavia is 3-0 against Hugh Freeze, and you also have Alabama at the end of the season. So there's a chance that you've already got, 5 losses in that conference just by teams that are definitely better than you or just toss-up games. And then here's the more depressing part. Auburn isn't even favored to win their season opener against Baylor. They're not a massive dog, and they are on the road. But say they lose to Baylor, and then they struggle, as I just said, in the SEC. They could be 3-4 or 2-5 with 5 games to go. And momentum could be ruined. It might not matter how much you beat Vandy or Kentucky by at the end of the year. If you start 2-5, the job may be done. You might be out the door already at that point. You might not have the chance to coach the rest of the season. Baylor, Auburn, week 1, Friday Night Lights, so important for the Hugh Freeze era at this university. If he loses, I have a tough time thinking that he makes it to November. Let's move along to another guy in the SEC, another slightly troubled guy, and another guy that probably has a lot of his life riding on week 1, Brian Kelly at LSU. With Brian Kelly, I think what's hurting him the most right now is that it's never a good look when you leave for greener pastures, and the pastures you left start looking more green than they were when you were there. Now, I'll admit, Notre Dame has been able to take advantage of this new era of paying players and getting your entire TV rights deal to really enhance things at that university. But that being said, if you leave a place because you're not able to keep winning there or to compete for national championships, and then that team is in the national championship just a couple years later, it doesn't look good when you haven't done that yet at your new destination. Now, Kelly, what he does have going for him, he's done well at LSU. 29-11 record in 3 seasons. He hasn't brought him to the postseason, but he's done good enough. But I think that's what's tough for LSU is that good enough really isn't going to cut it when you also don't feel like an authentic representation of the university. Like Ed Ogeron, if he was 29-11, that's an LSU guy. He's very beloved. Of course, he has the national championship. But Brian Kelly from the start just felt like this really awkward fit. And if you're an awkward fit, it's fine if you're winning national championships. Like Dabo Swinney is a weird personality. You know what he does? He wins, and he's a national championship winning coach. Brian Kelly is clunky, and he also hasn't really found that next level at LSU. I said it before when talking about Garrett Nussmeier. There's so much chatter as to why LSU is for sure heading to the playoffs, deep playoff run, SEC title mix. Fine. I just think there's a lot of things that we still need to see first. Yes, you spent money in the portal. Yes, it's another year of Blake Baker's defensive system. Garrett Nussmeier is really this outcome-changing capable quarterback. The schedule is somewhat manageable, but 3 starters on the offensive line, like I said. The secondary, they made additions, but you used to be DBU, and it just hasn't been that under Brian Kelly. It's actually been one of your weaker positional spots. Nuss needs to cut back on the turnovers. Can you actually run the football? I just feel like there's so many things that you need to wait to see before we're saying like, oh, yep, this is it. LSU did all these things in the offseason, and now they're in the playoffs. I need to watch a few games. And where it gets tough for them, just like it does with Hugh Freeze playing Baylor, week 1 against Clemson, everyone knows Brian Kelly is 0-3 in season openers with the LSU Tigers. A win is great for him. And even a close loss, I'll be like, hey, I think very highly of Clemson. A close loss I'll take it because I do think Clemson is one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the nation. But say that LSU goes out and they lose to Clemson the same way Clemson lost to Georgia in week 1 of last season. And they just get the doors blown off them. Clemson's defense is breathing down the LSU offensive line. And they can't run the football. And Nuss has 2 picks. And defensively, they can't stop Cade Klubnik. Now, last year, Clemson turned things around. And they won the ACC. And it was like this thing where you're like, okay, not too big of a result. But Dabo has a decade of consistently winning at Clemson to back up a bad loss. Brian Kelly can't afford that and then go into an SEC schedule. I'll start to hit the panic button a little bit if it's this big blowout. Could it be a great season? Totally. They've got a ton of talented players. They're one of the premier programs in the nation. I kind of have to see it because I haven't seen it yet from them. All right, and then the last coach we're going to talk about before we get to our third and final storyline that is going to shape the college football season is Brent Venables. Brent Venables is in a weird predicament because he's got a little bit of that Brian Kelly where he does have a 10-3 season at Oklahoma. He did beat Texas one season, but that was also back when they were in the Big 12. The SEC results thus far have been bleh, is the best way to describe it. And Oklahoma isn't one of those programs that will put up with 3 losing seasons in your first 4 years. I think he went 6-7, 10-3, 6-7. Another losing season, I think Oklahoma will be like, all right, this isn't it. That being said, there are a lot of reasons to buy into Oklahoma this upcoming season. Now, just as I said with LSU, you have to see these certain things, but the quarterback offensive coordinator duo from Washington State in John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle supposedly is one of those things that not Oklahoma lucked into, but it could be a momentum-changing addition here. And Mateer is a very talented quarterback. I'm more looking at Ben Arbuckle, who I think might be one of those guys where in a few years he's a head coach of a program and he's like that Lincoln Riley when Lincoln Riley was Lincoln Riley. One of those guys where you're like, what is this guy doing as a play caller? He's a genius. He might be a few years ahead of everybody. I like John Mateer. I think Ben Arbuckle is the real key addition to this program. Jaden Ott was fantastic at Cal. He'll slide in here and be a really good running back for the Sooners. Deion Burks, wide receiver, got banged up last year, only played 5 games. He should be one of the better wide receivers in the conference. They have a experienced, strong offensive line. Venables is back calling plays for the defense. I think they're going to be a lot more aggressive of a football team this upcoming year. There are reasons why I could take a look at Oklahoma, just like I said with LSU, and be like, hey, they could be a lot better. The difference between the two, I guess to keep tying them back in with each other, Brian Kelly needs to make the playoffs. He needs to be in contention for an SEC title. Oklahoma right now, I think if you could get an 8-5 season, or if you could get to 9 wins, that's going to keep Brent Venables in the head coaching spot. Stop me if you've heard me say this before a few times in this show. The schedule in the SEC is tricky. 7-game stretch to close the regular season. They have Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Mizzou, and LSU. Those are all teams that should be in the top half of the conference. 5 of those teams were either in or one of the first teams out of the playoffs last year. And you also open SEC play with Auburn, who we just talked about, and they also host Michigan in the second week of the season. Oklahoma could be one of the best 12 to 15 teams in the nation and still be like a 500 football team, just with the way the schedule lines up. I'd hope that an 8-5 season can keep Venables here for another year. I think he's one of the best defensive play callers in the nation. But anything worse than that, another 6-7 season, I could see them starting to push him out the door and look for greener pastures.